My name is Mike Silver. I was born Mendel Zilberfaden, and I was born in Kielce, Poland, and the town is Kielce. And we lived in a nice home in Kielce, a Nowy Świat 36, 36. And when the war, we also had a home in Suchedniew. It was our summer home, and we used to go there for the summer. So when the war broke out on September 1st, 1939, we were in Suchedniew for the summer, and at that time there was 4 siblings. I was the youngest. My oldest brother was Jurek, and I had 2 sisters, Sesha and Paula. And I was born in 1928, November 2nd. And when the German front was moving up closer to Suchedniew, we hired a horse and buggy, and we were trying to move away from the front as the German was approaching our town. And we loaded up some of the belongings, and as we were on the road moving up, the German airplanes swooped down and killed our horse, and we survived, and we carried our luggage and what we had back, and we went back to Suchedniew. By the time we got back to Suchedniew, the Germans were already there.
How far was that from your summer home to?
It was about 28 kilometers from Suchedniew to Kielce, and we stayed in Suchedniew for about 3 months, and then my father went back and took us back to Kielce, to our original home. And we lived in Kielce for 1 year in the ghetto. When the ghetto was formed, my father thought we had a better chance to survive if we go back to the little shtetl, and try to stay there. So we moved back to Suchedniew. And that's where my father's business was. He owned the lime factories. He had and they had the mines, we had the mines, which is still in business now in Poland. And we were pretty well off. We lived a nice life. And when we came back to Suchedniew at that time, we were not allowed the Jewish kids to go to school anymore. So we were schooled at home. My mother was a school teacher, so she was able to school us at home.
You spoke at that time Polish?
We spoke mostly Polish, but we knew Jewish. My grandparents also lived in Suchedniew. My grandfather was in charge of the town, and his name was Israel Zilberfaden. My name was Wolf David Zilberfaden, and my mother's name was Chaya And we lived in Sukhanev for about 2 years, and the conditions were getting worse. And when they started the ghetto in Sukhanev, there was a chance for families to go to concentration camp. They were looking for people to work in the ammunition factories. So we more or less like volunteered, 6 of us. There was 4 children, my parents, and they had about 200 people from that shtetl to go to concentration camp. And they took us all by train to that ammunition factory in that camp. And before we left, my father made everybody new shoes and boots. And I was so happy to have my new boots. And the first thing when we got to camp, the German assessment told me to take my boots off and gave me a pair of wooden shoes. That was my first experience when we got to camp. So when we got to camp, we worked in the ammunition factory. They used to get us up 5 o'clock in the morning, and we would walk for about 3 miles to the factory, and we would come home in the evening about 6 o'clock, march back. When we get up in the morning, they would line us all up and have the appeal, and they would count the prisoners, And
Was your father working with you?
my father was working with me. I was very young at the time, so they gave me a job to work in a warehouse. What I was doing is when they were bringing back the clothes from the people that they killed in the crematoriums, I would sort out the clothes, and some of it I would cut up in rags for the workers in the factory to use rags for the machines.
Were there any valuables in some of the clothing?
No, most of it were just clothes that they took off and told the people they were going into the showers to take a shower. And the valuables they used to take, the soldiers, the assessment would take it off before they would go into the showers.
Mike, how old were you when you were doing that job?
I was about 11 and a half years old at the time, but I was always tall, so that helped me to survive, because if you couldn't do the work, if you weren't big enough, then you wouldn't be working anymore.
So this was I'm sorry, I'm confused. This was the ghetto, or this was a camp?
No, this was the concentration. The camp, when they opened up the ghetto, we decided, the Germans were looking for people to go to work, and they say, you can go as a family and work as a family. The conditions were very hard. We would get a piece of bread in the morning and some hot water, and then we wouldn't get any food till the evening. In the evening, when we would come back from work, we would get soup, which wasn't much to eat. It was mostly water and another piece of bread. We were fed twice a day. But I want to tell this little story. I thought about it last night. When I was working in that warehouse, there were little nails, and So one day I decided to take these little nails and smuggle it out, just bring it back to the camp, because we all had wooden shoes, and the wooden shoes would crack. So when they cracked, we used to put racks around it, but when we had the nails, the little nails, we were able to fix those wooden shoes. So I took a rack and I put it between my legs and tied it up around my waist. And as we were walking back from the factory to the camp, that rack kept sliding on me, you know, I kept pulling it back. So as we were walking through the German guards, he pulled me out. He says, "What is your problem? Why are you walking like this?" So I said, "I had an accident." So he gave me a kick in the rear end. He says, "Get back in line." Luckily, he didn't find those nails. If he would have found the nails, I wouldn't have been walking anymore. So I thought this was a...
Did you have any extended family?
Well, yes, most of our family that was left in the ghetto, they liquidated the ghetto like 30 days later, and they all went to Auschwitz. So my grandparents, my uncles, my aunts, whoever lived in Sukhanev, they vanished in Auschwitz. They were criminated in Auschwitz. So we worked in that, it was a munition factory that we worked in, and we put in long hours. In the winter time, you know, we didn't have much clothes, and those wooden shoes in the snow was very hard.
How long did you work in that ammunition? Was it?
We worked there for a year and a half.
So that was like different seasons you
Yeah,
were exposed to.
right. The winter time was the worst time because there was no place. The barracks were 5 high, the beds, you know, and there was
5 levels?
5 levels high, and there was straw in there, but you had a blanket to cover yourself up. So the idea of these barracks were to be on top if you had the strength, and if you were young enough to get up on top, you were better off, because people, if you were on the bottom, people would urinate and it would come through to the bottom. So my father was a heavy-set man, and he couldn't get up on top. But me and my brother would get up on top, and we would stay up on top.
So the latrines were...
the latrines were, people just didn't get up at nighttime and go to the latrines, and the latrines were a little bit of a distance to walk in the winter months. So after about 8 months in this camp, there was a typhus epidemic, and most of the people, through the circumstances, there was no clean, what's the word I'm looking for?
Showering?
There was no showering, there was nothing there. So my father got sick first, and they had a special barrack where they put the people for typhus there. And if you didn't work, if you couldn't go to work within 7 days, they would take you away, whether you were alive or dead.
Wow.
So my father was gone first, and then my mother had typhus, and she was gone 6 days later. And then I had typhus, but I survived
How do you think you survived?
because I was young
Younger,
enough
a little healthier.
and a little healthy. And my father was a heavy-set man.
Was he a
and-
big man? Like
Yeah.
you? Tall?
Yeah, he was tall, and
How old would he have been at that time?
he was about 41.
And your mother?
My mother was 43 when she died. They were killed 6 days apart. So every day they would pull up the trucks and unload the people from that barrack. They were already there for a few days. They couldn't go to work. But I got out for my typhus after 5 days, and I was able to go back to work.
So you were in that sick barracks.
I was in the sick barrack for 5 days, but I got out in 5 days.
Were you aware of how many days had gone by or what that
No,
meant?
I was nowhere. There was no doctors or nurses or anybody to help you. You were pretty well on your own. And
But did you have the feeling you needed to get out of there, or you would have?
well, we knew after a few days that if I don't get out, I wouldn't be able to make it anymore. So I got out and I went back to work. And we stayed in that factory, in that camp, for about 2 years. And then we were moved as the Russian front was moving up closer. We were moved further back to Poland, and we were moved to the next camp, which was Częstochowa. And
What was that first camp called?
Skarżysko-Kamienne was the first camp. And that camp was also ammunition factory. In that camp, they would be making the grenades, and they were making the bigger bullets for the artillery.
Artillery.
Yeah, and they had a yellow powder that we would be putting into that. And that yellow powder, if you inhale, first of all, you would turn yellow after a few months working at it. And
Wow.
the yellow powder, if you inhale, you would be just like dying within a few months. But somehow we got transferred, me and my brother. At that point, we were separated already from our sisters. So we got transferred out of that camp to the camp where my sisters were, where they would just do regular ammunition work, bullets instead of the powder, the yellow powder.
Did you turn yellow from?
We turned yellow, me and my brother, but we were only there maybe 6 to 8 weeks.
Wow.
And when we got to the other camp, that was already towards the end of 44, and the Russian front was coming closer over time. And towards the end, we had Polish workers working in the camps with us, and they were, they were on the outside. They were cluing us in. They were giving us information what was going on in the war. And we knew that the war was coming closer and closer to an end. So the conditions at the second camp was much worse because the Germans
Where your sisters were?
yeah,
Yeah.
the Germans were running out of food, and whatever food there was, they were feeding the soldiers. So what I used to do, I was working in that warehouse. I was able to trade some of the stuff that was there from clothes and this to the Polish workers, and they would bring some bread in and some other things, and I would share that when we get home. When we get back to the camp, to the barracks, I would share that with my family, you know. And that's how we were able to survive the last 2 months before the war ended.
So the job in the factory sorting clothes was the second camp,
Yeah, the second camp.
and the first camp you were
And work in the ammunition, yeah. And then in December of 1944, we already were starting making plans because they were already closing down this factory and moving everybody to Auschwitz, you know, to liquidate the camp.
How far was that from Auschwitz or Birkenau?
Auschwitz was from Częstochowa about 150 kilometers. It was closer towards the German border near Krakow. So
people traveled from there by train, I think.
yeah. So what we did, we decided we found a place in the factory. Underneath there was a basement where we could get about 30 of the people into this basement. And if we can get enough water in there, we were going to stay there for about 3 days, and then hopefully by that time we would be liberated. So when they were starting, every day they would take people out of the barracks and put them in boxcars and ship them out. And there were less and less people going to the factory.
Let's take a little break here while Cecile comes in here. We'll just.
Yeah,
How much
ready,
longer
sure.
do you
That would be
want?
good. So you're going to be talking about the Russians liberated you.
So,
By Russians.
Wait, Mike, can you go back just a little bit?
sure,
So you knew that they were taking people every day to Auschwitz
right.
from the camp that you were in, and so you were thinking you had this plan with others how to stay.
How to stay, we figured if we get on the trains, most of the people on the trains were dying before they even got to the other camps. So we knew our best chance to survive was we had this basement we found underneath the factory that we could get like 30 people in there. So we decided when it came to the end of December, beginning of January, we decided, actually it was like the 15th of January when we went into this basement. Instead of when the job was over that day, instead of getting back and lined up to walk back to the camps, we went into the basement. And we had close to 30 people that were in there. We had some water and whatever food we could find.
Men and women?
Men and women. I was
And children?
I was the youngest.
Yeah.
I was the youngest in that group. In fact, I was the youngest in most of the camp that we were at.
And how old were you at that point?
I was at that point about 14 already.
So
That was in 1944.
So that was a risky move because they were probably looking for you guys for that.
You're right, you're right. And what was happening when they appeal, when you go back to camp, they lined you up and they counted people. And when they start counting, and if they were missing, they would go back to the factory to look for them. In the beginning, in the first camp, if they lined up the people and there were people missing, they would pull every 10th one out of the line and kill them right in front of the prisoners to make sure that that doesn't happen again. But in the second camp, towards the end, the Germans themselves knew it was coming to an end, and they weren't as strict, but they knew there was people missing. So we stayed in that basement for about 3 days. There was a little window there, but there was bars there. And we were looking through that window. We could hear the bombs coming. We could hear the cannons going off, but we didn't know if the guards were still there or they left. So after the third night, from all the shooting and everything, we figured it's got to be close to the end. So what happened, there was the bars in this little window. I was very skinny at the time. They pushed me through the bars to the outside, through that window, and I climbed out, and I started crawling to see if the guards were there. I looked up. There was no electricity. I was looking at where the guards usually stay up on top, and I couldn't see anybody. So I must have crawled for about 10 minutes, and I crawled up to the German housing where they were living. And I couldn't find any lights or anything either, so I walked into one of the houses in the kitchen, and there was a stove. They had food on the stove. So the first thing I did is grab some of it. There were peaches and whatever was there, I just grabbed and started shoveling it. And I was selfish at the time. Instead of running back and telling the people that we are liberated, I stuffed my stomach with the food, and then I started running back to tell them the good news. And at that time, it was an unbelievable celebration. Everybody hugged and kissed each other. And by the time we came up, it was already like 5:30 in the morning, 6 o'clock. It started getting light. And we saw the Russian Red Army was coming in with tanks. And the soldiers came down, and and they knew it. We were in camp, so first thing they did is gave everybody some food and some water. And in fact, there was one Russian officer that spoke Jewish. It was a Jewish officer, and we started telling him our story. And the four of us, me and my two sisters and my brothers. My brother, he was the oldest. We all were liberated by the Russian army. And then we had no place where to go. We had no clothes, no money, and the war was still, the front was moving up towards the German borders. So we went into town in the Częstochowa, and we tried to find some places where we could get some food, because the stores were all, people were going into stores and taking whatever they could take. There was no order. There was no police, and there was nobody. So we got some food, and then we found a little place where we stayed for a few days in Częstochowa, but there were too many of the survivors in that town. So we decided we're going to move back up to Kielce, to our hometown, you know. And when we got back to Kielce, we found out that all of our family is gone. They've all been killed. And the people that my father left the business to, the manager, you know, and he left them also our belongings, you know, the jewelry and the furs and everything. When we went to see him, he said that the Germans took everything away from him. He has nothing he can give us. And he was very unfriendly to us.
Very unfriendly?
Very unfriendly. He wasn't happy.
Friendly before, when he worked
friendly,
with your,
yeah,
with
but
your father.
very unfriendly at that point. He didn't want to have... He wasn't happy that we survived and we came back. And
You must have looked like ghosts.
we did. I weighed about 65 pounds, you know.
Wow.
And then we started to try to... We knew that Poland was not our place where to stay. And we wanted to get out of Poland as quickly as we could, because the Polacks were very unfriendly to the Jewish people. And in fact, during the war, they knew who the Jews were, and they would point them out. If Jews would try to go into hiding, they would point out who the Jews were, you know. They would make a few zlotys for that the Germans were paying for.
Mike,
So we could see that our future was not in Poland, so we decided we left Kielce, we moved to the second city, which was Katowice. That was near the German border. And when we got to Katowice, a lot of the German people, they were Volksdeutsche. When Poland was there, there were Polacks. When the Germans were there were Germans. They called themselves Volksdeutsche. So they left because they were worried that the Polish population would hurt them. They would probably kill them. So they left. So we moved into a nice apartment where Germans had lived previously. And everything was there, so we moved in and we lived there. And this is the first time in about 5 years that we slept in a bed, and we had everything that, you know, in our house, in our home that we used to have before the war.
Mike, how did you have the ability to stay there? I mean, were they demanding you pay rent, or did you just kind of...
No, the Germans have left and the places were empty, so we just moved in. At that time, money really wasn't buying anything because the money was worthless. The only thing you could do is trade, you know. If you had a ring or a watch, you could trade. So at that time, I started to trade with the Russian soldiers a little bit. They would love watches and vodka. So I would bring them, I would get watches, and the bigger the watches, even if it was an alarm clock, if you could put it on your wrist and put a bender on it, they would love it. So and they used to bring clothes and food to us, and we would trade with them. And
1945?
Yeah, it was 1945, around February, March of 45. The war was not over yet. The front was moving into Germany. The Russian army was moving into Germany.
How far were you from a large town, the larger town?
This was a large town. Katowice was one of the larger towns. It was on the German border.
Okay.
Yeah. So we lived in this town for about 7, 8 months, and my brother, he was educated in college. He got a job with the new Polish government. He was working for the FBI, for the Polish FBI. And he got, after a couple months, he got promoted. In fact, where we lived, there was a Polish guard in front of our apartment. He had a uniform, he carried a gun, he had a big job with the Polish government. And when we decided that we wanted to leave Poland, that my brother said that this was the future for the Jews, that things have changed in Poland. And his belief was in communism. He thought that the Jews could live in Poland and have a nice life under the new regime, because the new Polish regime was communistic. It was a puppet government set up by the Russians. He felt that we should stay. So when he heard that we decided to leave, he was very unhappy about us leaving. And the three of us moved. We crossed into Czechoslovakia, and from Czechoslovakia we crossed into Germany. He went to the American sector in Germany. And we went into Augsburg, and we lived in Augsburg until we went to Augsburg in 1945, the end of 45. We lived in Augsburg till 49. And while we were in Augsburg, we applied through the highest to the Jewish agency to come to the United States. And in 1949, all of us came over to Buffalo, New York. And
That's where you landed?
And that's where we landed. I was supposed to go to Omaha, Nebraska. Everybody had a different, but we wanted to stay together as a family, so we all went to Buffalo, New York, and I lived in Buffalo till 1956. In 56, we came to a visit to Chicago for Passover, and I met my future wife, Cecile,
in Chicago.
And in 56, I moved down to Chicago. And at that time, I worked for Ford Motor Company, and they had built a new factory in Chicago Heights. And I got promoted to a general supervisor there. And we got married in 57. And I worked for Ford between Buffalo and Chicago for 15 years for Ford. Yeah. And in the meantime, we had 2 children born in 61 and 62. We had Helene born in 1961, and our son David in 62. And we lived a nice life on the south side of Chicago until the neighborhood changed, and I left Ford. I went into business, and
what
then
kind of business did you go into?
at that time, I went into laundry and dry cleaning business. I had 5 locations. And in 1975, I have to back up a little bit. In 69, we moved to Highland Park. We left the south side because the neighborhood changed.
This was a good time here to move to Highland.
Yeah, right.
69.
And we, in 1975, I switched the business. I sold my other business and moved into the trucking business. I got a trucking dealership, and I stayed in that business till 1995. I was there for 20 years in that business, and then I retired.
When, in 1995?
In 1995, and I was retired for 1 year, but I didn't like retirement, so I bought a new little business, and I've just been doing this for a while. And we have a very nice family. We are very happy, and America's been very good to us, and
You've been good to America.
and we've been good to America. We try to be.
What business did you get into after you retired?
The laundry and dry cleaning
Back into
business,
that?
yeah.
Oh, okay.
But I don't go there much. I got people working there. It's in Wisconsin, in Kenosha.
Oh,
So I go there once or twice a week, and I got people working. And it just gives me something to
Something
do.
to do, that's
Yeah.
good.
So what about can we go back to the decision to leave Poland? What about your brother? You said he was unhappy.
My brother was happy. He thought that the future for the Jewish people, the way the new Polish government was, things have changed. But we knew that the people were always anti-Semitic. They hated Jews. And I couldn't, as a young kid, I couldn't wait to get out of Poland.
did you experience anti-Semitism when you were going to school?
Very much so. When we got out of classes, when I was 7 or 8 years old, if you couldn't run fast enough, and if they catch you, you were getting beaten up. In fact, the first time I learned how to swim is when they threw me into a lake.
Wow.
I had no choice but to get out of it. I had to swim out of it.
But what about after the war? What was the anti-Semitism?
They were just as bad after the war. In fact, now a town in Kielce, in 1946, there was a pogrom where they said that the Jews were looking for little children for blood, for the matzahs.
Wow.
So they started a pogrom. And that's the famous pogrom after the war in Kielce. They killed 36 Jews, and they injured quite a few.
And you were there then?
No, we were gone already. We were in
That was 46.
46, we were in Katowice.
Did your brother stay?
My brother stayed. This is another long story, but I don't know if you... I'll just give you the highlight of it because I don't want to drag it out. My brother stayed, and what happened to him was something that really ruined his life because as he stayed there, he kept getting promoted and promoted. He had one of the top jobs in the Polish government. And when there was Jews that were trying to get out of Poland at that time, there was 49, 48, 49, and 50. The Polish government didn't want them to leave. And if they catch them, they bring them back and put them to jail. And when they brought back a busload of Jews to jail, my brother went ahead and let them all go. He gave the order to let them go. And when his supervisors, the Polish government, found out that he told these people and let them all leave, they came arrested him and put him in jail.
Well, even though he was high official.
Even though he's high official, he went against their laws, and he wound up 3 years in a Polish jail.
Wow.
And when he finally came out, you know, first he had concentration camp and then had the jail. And when he finally came out, he was a broken man. His wife and child survived by friends helping him out because they had no money. They took everything away from him. And then he went to Austria in 1955 and stayed in Austria for 2 years, and then he came over to the United States. We sent him papers to come to the United States, but he was a broken man. He was never the same. He was always sick after that.
Did he come to Chicago, or where did
No, he lived in New York.
Did he have family there?
Yeah, he had a wife and a child, and he lived in New York, and he went into a business, but he was always sick. And he died in 1998.
Were you close with him?
Very close. Our family always stayed close together. There was 4 children, and we used to travel to each other's homes at least a couple times a year. Any simcha that came up, we were always together.
Did you come from a pretty religious background when your mom and dad were?
We were not, I would say we were conservative. My grandparents were the religious ones. Our were more conservative Jews. We kept a kosher home. You know, we celebrated all the holidays, but my father didn't have the pious and the beard, and like my grandfather did. My grandfather was the leader of the town there in Sukhanev, the president of the shul and the whole.
Mike, on what grounds were they arresting people in Poland after the war? You said this busload of they were saying that
they were escaping from Poland. They were trying to cross the border into Czechoslovakia and escape.
And at that stage, it's a Russian. It's the Polish. Poland is a Russian satellite.
Yeah, so was Czechoslovakia, and they caught them on the border and brought them back. And they said they were treating them as treasons. They were running away from their country. They didn't take much to find Jews guilty for anything. You know.
So when you got out, though, it was before the Soviets controlled Poland, or?
Well, they just started in '45. You know, they were just setting up a puppet Polish government of communists. You know, and at that time it was pretty easy to get across borders and get away. You know, we traveled by foot. We crossed the borders at night times, you know, and we were able to get away pretty easily.
How about a little bit about your children? What they are
The
doing
children are, we have 2 beautiful children and 5 grandchildren. Our children are very nice to us. They both had careers. My son is a lawyer. He's got his own law firm. He's got a few lawyers, one partner and a few lawyers working for him. My daughter married an attorney, and he's got his own firm. They're financially very well off.
Good.
They have beautiful children. They're all getting educated, which I never had a chance to do. And we live lived
up being a
on.
good businessman. You started a
We
couple
tried.
businesses.
There was always a struggle. Believe me, I always missed my youth and my education. That was my two of the biggest problems in my life that I missed.
Well,
One of the worst things when our first camp, when we came, and we used to have the appeal where they would line up the people when they come back from the factory, and they would count the people, the prisoners, and if there was some missing, they would take every 10th person out of the line and kill him and shoot him right in front of us.
so you witnessed that.
So we witnessed that, and that left a mark that I'll never forget, because one of my sister's closest friends was one of them that got killed at that particular time. And after that happened the first time, there was nobody that was running away from camp. Or what they used to do is hide in the factory and got out from the factory. Instead of coming back to camp, they would run away from the factory, because our camp had electric wiring around, and the German SS was sitting on top of the, what is it called?
Guardhouse.
The guardhouses, and and it was impossible to run away. What people used to do if they wanted to commit suicide, they would run up to the wire and grab the wire, and then they would die on the spot.
What about your sisters? You mentioned you have one sister.
I still have one sister. She's 86 years old, and she lives in Hollywood, Florida, and she has 2 children and 6 grandchildren. And should I mention about Wolf or no?
What about your other sister? Yeah.
My other sister died early. She died when she was 52 years old. And my brother lived to be in 78.
So your sister in Hollywood, Florida, is the mother of Wolf Blitzer?
She's the mother of Wolf Blitzer, yeah.
Do you remember when your parents were taken because of the typhus to that barrack? Was there any? Did you guys have the ability to say goodbye? Obviously, you.
No, we could never see them, and we could never say goodbye to them. But we knew when they cleaned out the barrack, that they were gone. We knew. So I have yurtzeit 6 days apart.
Because you remember, exactly when they
I
cleaned
know
out the
exactly. It was the last day of Pesach, and 6 days later.
You were fortunate you had typhus, and yet you
And I had
survived.
I had typhus a second time after the war.
Oh.
Because I don't know if I should go on anymore.
Okay.
I don't think I can go on. I need to run to the washroom.
Sure. So can you just tell the story of what happened to your nose and
Well, I did tell you about my boots the first day I got in camp. And it wasn't the second day when we were in camp when we were lined up for the appeal. And
lined up for the what?
Appeal, where they count the people and they give you the day what you're going to be doing, what time, the orders for the day. And when they were doing this, as a young kid, I kind of stepped out of line, and the German soldier came over and hit me with the rifle butt across my face and kind of messed up my nose. And since then, I had a couple of surgeries, but I could never breathe right through my nose, and I'm still suffering with it.
So you said you were pretty young, and
I was pretty young and restless, you know, and it was my second day, and I wasn't used to this kind of regiment, you know. It was something new for me. I just didn't know the consequences, what will happen if I step out. But I've learned the hard way. Since then, I never stepped out again.
Cecile remembered that your mom might have really pushed to have you guys volunteer.
What happened was my mom, she spoke a few languages. She was a school teacher, and one of them was perfect German. And the Germans formed a Judenrat, a Jewish organization that were in charge of the little shtetl that we were at. And my mother knew from the Judenrat, from that organization, they were getting ready to liquidate the ghetto and ship everybody out to the crematoriums. So my mother came back and organized a group of people in the shtetl, and there was about 80-some people that she had organized that we all volunteered to go to work in this ammunition factory in Skarżysko-Kamienna. And that's how we were safe from getting shipped out to the concentration camps, to the crematoriums.
Did your dad or any of the other people in this group, did they have to be convinced by your mother, or what was her?
No, my mother pretty well convinced everybody that there wasn't any other option, that we knew we were the ghetto was closing up, and we already knew at that time that people that go out in those trains to Auschwitz never come back, and that was our only options to try and survive longer. We didn't know if we were going to make it or not, but we knew we were going to prolong it a little bit.
Was there a concern that they wouldn't accept you in the munitions factory if you volunteered?
No, because I was the youngest. My father was the oldest, so they were only in the 40s. So, you know, if you could work, they would accept you. If you were healthy enough to work, you were young enough, they would accept you.
Have you, years later, talked to when your brother finally came from Poland after prison and stuff, and you were all together in the States, did you talk much about the war?
He knew he made a mistake. He knew that it was time. What we did was the right thing to do, leave Poland. But in his mind, he thought that communism was the right way to go for Jewish people. And communism, after the Russian Revolution in the 1920s, caught up real big in Poland. And he belonged to an organization where, you know, communism was the common culture, the common way of life, and he thought that Polish governments have changed.
And when you were all together for say Passover and that kind of thing, would your experiences in the camps and your difficult times, would it come up?
No, that's one thing my family would never discuss camps or never be able to talk about it to their children until they were in the late 70s, when the kids were asking questions, that they would start talking about it. In fact, my sister and my brother would never go see a Schindler List movie or any movies about concentration camps. If any scenes would come up about camps, they would walk out. They could never handle it.
It was just too close to them, so that experience was too...
Yeah, it was too fresh on their mind.
What do you remember about what the Russians said when they came, and what the conversation was when they came to liberate?
Well, the first thing they asked us if we knew whether any of the SS was hidden, if we can point out any of the places where they might be, you know. And if they did catch any of them, they would bring us up and ask if we wanted to take any revenge on them, you know. And a lot of us did, you know, if we did find any of them. But most of them managed to escape, you know, and they had ways of disguising themselves as prisoners and as Jews and any other way.
So you guys did take revenge on some, though, or?
We did, right. We did find, in fact, we found one of the assistant of the camp, which was, had a, what do you say, when he had that big back, hunchback, where he had a hunchback. And he had, when he gave his, he always walked with two German shepherds when he was going through the lines where we were all lined up. And if he saw somebody he didn't like, he would give the order in German, Mensch fress dem Hund. That means he called the dog the Mensch, the person, and the Jew the dog. And he would give the order to the German shepherds to go after the Jew. So we called him, the Russians actually pointed him out, and they got him, and we took revenge on him.
What did you do?
Well, I don't think he survived that day. Everybody took a little piece of him out. Everybody took some anger out on him.
Was that satisfying, or was it less than satisfying?
It was something that we felt inside of us that, you know, it just came out automatically when we saw him. The hatreds and the feelings we had against him just came out automatically.
So he could just tell these dogs and they would attack a prisoner?
They would attack a prisoner, or he'd tell them in German, Mensch fress dem Hund, and that was the time they would attack you.
And did you see them kill people, or these dogs?
Well, if they didn't kill him, they came close to, you know, injure him for life, where they would be hauled away in a wagon. You know, they would never be able to walk again.
So, Mike, were this group of 30 that hid in the basement, were these the only people who survived at this camp that you know of?
No, there were some that didn't go to Auschwitz. Some went to Buchenwald, to Germany, to another concentration camp. And some of them did survive. But the majority of them went to Auschwitz and Birkenau.
So how many people do you think worked in this factory?
In this factory, you must have had about 2,800 Jewish people working in there.
And really, you were just a small group of 30 that were able to...
There was the group of 30 that survived that we know of. There might have been some other Jews that hid themselves, but this group, in fact, after the war, we kind of stayed together, kept track of each other for quite a few years.
Oh, really?
But this time, most of them are probably gone, because I was the youngest in the group.
Did you find that... I just can't imagine, after having an experience like this, especially as such a teenager and a young person, that you could even feel safe anywhere, or feel or sleep peacefully, or...
Well, what I did is I tried to block most of it out of my mind. I was not really concentrating on the things that were happening to me when I was at that age. And after the war, you know, things were kind of wild. I mean, there was no rules or regulation you followed. You pretty well did what you want. And we just lived a a kind of crazy life after the war. Didn't have to work. We didn't go back to school. It was too late for me, which I regret till this day, that I didn't get the education I should have gotten. And we just could never concentrate on things we should have done with our lives until later on in life when we came to this country. That was my first time I ever got a job when I came to this country.
Can you just, for the last, just so we make sure we have it, can you just introduce yourself again? My name is, and I was originally, and I'm from?
Yeah. My name is Mike Silva, originally Mendel Silberfaden, born in Poland, Kielce, on November 2nd, 1928. And now is Mike Silva, and we live in Highland Park, Illinois. And today is April 2nd, 1908.
Okay. Great. That's great, Mike.
It's a great idea. I meant to bring this picture down and show you. I'm glad you brought this up.
So yeah, tell me what this picture is.
Should I start talking now?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. After the war, when we went back to see to check on our belongings and ours, we went to see the manager.
Oh, I'm sorry. Just actually, let's put that down, and when you come to it, you could bring it up. Okay.
Okay.
And just a second. Sorry. And okay.
Well, after the war, when we went back to Kielce to find the manager that worked for my father's business, we wanted to get some of the belongings that my father left with him. He told us he didn't have anything left. The Germans took everything away from him. And the only thing we found was this one picture that was hanging in the office. And we asked him for the picture. We took this picture. This is a picture of my family in 1938 when we were on vacation. The only person that's missing is my sister at the table. She was misbehaving and she was sent away from the table. Otherwise, there's all my brother, my sister, and my parents in the same picture. And that was taken in 1938 on vacation.
And this was at your summer home, or what?
This was in our summer home, yeah.
And what's that city called again?
Sukhanyov.
Sukhanyov. Okay, right. And so introduce the people in the photo again.
It's my father, my mother, my oldest brother Jurek, and my older sister Paula. And my sister Tsesha was sent away from the table for misbehaving.
You look incredibly happy there.
We were all a happy family. We didn't know what was coming our way. Had we known, we wouldn't have been so happy.
Yeah, 1938. Yeah,
Oh.
and then by
39 is September 1st, 1939 is when the war broke out.
And when was your town turned into a ghetto?
It was turned in 1940.
In 1940, right? Okay. So my gosh.